The morning light crept in slowly, thin and gray, barely reaching the corners of the small rental house in Briar Glen, Ohio. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, and the coffee maker hummed too loudly on the counter, filling the silence with an uneasy sound. Ethan Cole stood in the middle of the kitchen, motionless, his hands resting on the edge of the sink as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Behind him, footsteps. He turned just as Victoria Hale stepped out of the hallway. His boss. The woman who controlled his career. She was wearing borrowed clothes that didn't belong to her, her hair undone, her face pale but carefully composed. Her eyes flicked around the room before settling on him. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice tight, almost frightened, Did anything happen between us last night?" The question landed like a blow. One wrong answer could cost him his job, his reputation, and the fragile custody arrangement that kept his daughter safe. Down the hallway, Mia Cole hummed to herself while tying her shoes, innocent and unaware, her small voice drifting toward him like a reminder of everything he stood to lose. Ethan swallowed hard. There was no careful response. No safe version of the truth, only the truth itself. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The day before had started the way most of Ethan Cole's days did, too early and already heavy. The alarm went off at 5:30, but Ethan was awake before it sounded. He lay still for a moment, staring at the faint water stain on the ceiling of his bedroom, listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator clicked. The heat kicked on. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the wet road. These small sounds had become his markers of time, proof that the world kept moving, whether he was ready or not. He got up quietly, moving through the narrow hallway like the floor might give him away. In the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the man looking back. Mid-30s, technically. Older in the eyes. The kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. By 6, the kitchen light was on, and the routine had begun. Lunchbox open. Bread out. Peanut butter spread just to the edges. Apples sliced carefully so it would fit without bruising. A folded note tucked into the corner. "I love you. Be brave today." He wrote a note every morning. Even on the days his hands shook from exhaustion, especially on those days. From the bedroom down the hall, 8-year-old Miak emerged in mismatched socks, her hair tangled from sleep. She yawned and smiled when she saw him, like the sight of him alone made the day safer. "Is today practice day?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Music rehearsal after school." Her face lit up instantly. Music was her refuge. The place where she forgot she was the only kid in her class without a mom waiting at pickup. The place where she didn't feel different. They ate breakfast together at the small table, knees almost touching. Mia talked about a poster she was finishing for school, about the solo she'd been practicing quietly at night so she wouldn't wake him. Ethan listened to every word. He always did. Listening was something grief had taught him fast. How quickly moments disappeared if he didn't hold on to them. 3 years earlier, the house had sounded different. Louder, fuller. Then quieter than he thought possible. His wife had been gone for 3 years now, but the absence still lived in the corners of the house. In the empty chair. In the way he reached for his phone sometimes, forgetting there was no one to text about the small things anymore. There hadn't been time to fall apart. Mia had needed breakfast, school, reassurance. So Ethan had learned to carry grief the same way he carried everything else, silently, carefully, without dropping it. By 7:15, they were out the door. Ethan walked Mia inside the school building and waited until she disappeared down the hallway before turning back. He always waited. It was his quiet ritual, his way of making sure she was safe before stepping back into a world that measured him by deadlines instead of heartbeats. The drive to work was 30 minutes of numbers he never quite escaped. Rent, groceries, gas. The medical bill he was still paying off in small, cautious payments. On paper, his job as a senior financial operations analyst paid well. In reality, one income didn't stretch far when you were the only one holding everything together. One emergency, one mistake, and the balance tipped. At work, Ethan was reliable, the man who stayed late, the one who didn't complain when meetings ran long or when projects landed on his desk at the last minute. He double-checked reports. He met deadlines. He didn't ask for favors. Dependable was safer than noticeable, because if he lost this job, there was no backup plan. No second income, no partner to soften the fall. And hovering behind every fear was the one he never said out loud: custody. Mia's grandparents loved her, but they had resources Ethan didn't. Lawyers, time, opinions about what stability should look like. That night, after dinner and homework, Mia practiced her song in the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, pretending to scroll on his phone, pretending his chest didn't tighten when she sang with confidence he didn't feel inside himself. "Are you coming tomorrow?" she asked suddenly. "To the recital?" He smiled. "Of course." She studied him with the serious focus only children had. "You promise?" Ethan leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise." Later, after Mia was asleep, Ethan stood in the doorway of her room longer than usual. He adjusted the blanket, brushed a curl from her face, and listened to her steady breathing. Every night he made the same promise, to her and to himself. Tomorrow will be okay. He didn't know how many more times he could say it before life tested him again, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't afford to fail, not as an employee, not as a man, and never as Mia's dad. At work, Victoria Hale existed above Ethan Cole in every possible way. She was the chief financial officer, sharp, composed, untouchable. From Ethan's desk, she was usually seen through glass walls or at the head of long conference tables, her presence enough to quiet an entire room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When Victoria Hale asked a question, people scrambled to make sure they had the right answer. Ethan had learned early how to survive around her. Be prepared. Be invisible. Never give her a reason to look twice. She had a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to excuses. Missed deadlines didn't get sympathy. Sloppy work didn't get second chances. And yet, quietly, without ever saying so, she'd approved Ethan's flexible hours more than once. No lectures, no comments. Just a brief nod and a calendar adjustment. It wasn't kindness exactly, but it was fairness. And Ethan respected her for that. What no one talked about openly was what she carried outside the office. The divorce had finalized only weeks earlier. 12 years of marriage ended cleanly on paper, but not in reality. The board was watching her closely after a rough quarter, waiting for any sign of weakness. And Victoria, who had built her entire identity on being unshakable, gave them none. Until that Friday night. The company celebration was the kind of event Ethan usually avoided. Loud music, open bar, too many conversations that didn't matter. He almost skipped it entirely. Mia's recital was the same evening, and he planned to leave early anyway. But he went for appearances, and because a small part of him felt he owed it to the woman who hadn't penalized him for being a single dad. The venue was warm and crowded, string lights hanging from exposed beams, glasses clinking everywhere. Ethan grabbed a soda and stayed near the edges, checking his watch more than once. That's when he saw her. Victoria was at the bar. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of tailored suits and controlled expressions. Tonight, her hair was down, her dress softer, her posture looser. She laughed at something a colleague said, laughed too loudly, just a second too long. It stopped Ethan in his tracks. Victoria Hale didn't laugh like that. He watched from a distance as she accepted another drink. Then another. People gathered around her, drawn in by the rare warmth she allowed to surface. To anyone else, it probably looked like she was finally letting loose. To Ethan, it looked like something fraying at the edges. He checked the time. 6:15. He needed to leave soon. As if sensing him, Victoria turned and caught his eye. "Ethan," she said when she reached him, her voice warmer than he'd ever heard it. "I'm glad you came." "For a bit," he replied. "Didn't want to miss it." She nodded, studying him in a way that felt unfamiliar. "How's your daughter, Mia?" The fact that she remembered startled him. "She's good. Recital tonight." Victoria smiled softer this time. "That's important." They talked about work at first, numbers, projections, board pressure. Safe ground. Then the conversation drifted, slipping into quieter territory. Victoria mentioned the divorce without emotion, like she was reading a line item off a report. Ethan didn't ask questions. He just listened. He checked his watch again. 6:25. "I should head out," he said gently. "I promised." Victoria waved her hand, then missed the motion slightly. Her balance wavered for half a second before she caught herself. "I'm fine," she said too quickly. Ethan's chest tightened. He noticed the empty glasses near her elbow, the faint strain in her smile, the way her eyes didn't quite focus the way they had earlier. "Do you have a ride?" he asked carefully. Her expression hardened. "I don't need one." But her voice lacked conviction. "I can call you a car," he offered. She bristled, lowering her voice. "Not here. I don't want people watching." That was the moment Ethan understood the real danger. Not scandal, not rumors. Humiliation. Victoria Hale wasn't cruel. She wasn't reckless. She was exhausted, cornered by expectations, and terrified of being seen as anything less than in control. One wrong step tonight, and the narrative around her would change in ways she couldn't afford. Ethan glanced at the room. Phones out, conversations flowing. No one was really paying attention, until they were. He looked at his watch again. 6:28. Mia would be lining up backstage, scanning the crowd, trusting him. If he walked away now, no one would blame him. She was his boss. The power imbalance alone made this situation dangerous, and his daughter was waiting. But leaving Victoria like this, unsteady, exposed, one bad decision away from consequences that would follow them both, felt wrong. Ethan took a quiet breath. "I've got this," he said, already reaching for his phone. Victoria looked at him then, really looked at him. For the first time, her confidence cracked just enough to reveal the fear underneath. "Please," she said softly. And in that single word, Ethan realized something important. Whatever choice he made next wasn't just about work. It wasn't just about appearances. It was about who he was when no one was keeping score. Ethan checked the time one last time, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones. Then he stepped forward into a moment that would follow him long after the party ended and change everything that came after. Ethan didn't make a speech about it. He didn't announce what he was doing or ask for permission. He just acted. While the party around them grew louder, he shifted closer to Victoria, angling his body so anyone watching would assume it was a normal conversation between coworkers. Music pulsed through the space, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, but Ethan was focused on the small details, the way Victoria's fingers tightened around the edge of the bar, the way her balance wavered when she turned too quickly, the way her smile stayed in place even as her eyes dulled with exhaustion. "I'm calling a car," he said quietly. Victoria shook her head too fast. "No, not here. I don't want anyone seeing me like this." "I'll handle it," Ethan replied. His voice didn't rise. It didn't soften either. Calm had become second nature to him, what you learned when panic never helped and someone always needed you steady. He stepped aside, made the call, and arranged a pickup around the corner, away from the lights and the crowd. When he returned, Victoria was still standing, but only barely. One hand pressed flat against a bar now, knuckles white. 5 minutes, he told her. She nodded, the smallest sign of surrender. Outside, the air was damp and cold, rain misting the pavement and darkening the sidewalk. When the car arrived, Victoria took one step forward and faltered. Ethan caught her instinctively, but carefully. No pulling her close, no lingering. Just enough to keep her upright. The driver glanced back, curious. "She's not feeling well," Ethan said evenly. "Change of plans." He closed the door before questions followed. Ethan tried every option he could think of. He asked about friends, family, a hotel. Victoria shook her head each time, more slowly now, her words slurring just enough to worry him. "My keys," she murmured, searching her purse with clumsy hands. "I can't find my keys." Ethan checked his watch. 6:40. Mia would already be backstage. The familiar tightness closed around his chest, sharp and immediate. He stepped away and made one more call, this one to Mrs. Reynolds, the retired neighbor who lived 2 houses down. She'd watched Mia a handful of times over the years, always kind, always reliable. "Could you take Mia to the recital?" he asked quietly. "And, if I don't make it in time, could you record it for us?" There was no hesitation. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm already putting my coat on." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. "Thank you." When he hung up, the decision was made. Not easily, not without cost, but completely. The drive to his house was quiet. Victoria stared out the window, rain streaking down the glass like everything outside was blurring. She spoke in fragments, about the board, about expectations, about how tired she was of always being the strong one. Ethan didn't interrupt, he didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, eyes steady on the road, hands firm on the wheel. At the house, the porch light flicked on automatically. Ethan helped Victoria inside, keeping a careful distance. The space smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. Ordinary, unpolished, unmistakably a home. He guided her to the couch, brought water, set pain reliever on the table. He pulled a blanket from the hall closet and placed it over her shoulders. "You're safe," he said. "I'm going to step out for a bit." She nodded, already drifting. Ethan hurried back to the car and drove to the school. Rain heavier now, every red light feeling personal. He arrived just as applause filled the auditorium, not for Mia's solo, but for the group that followed. He spotted her afterward near the side door, clutching her music folder. "Daddy," she said, running to him. "You were incredible," he told her, crouching down, hugging her tightly. She smiled, then hesitated. "Did you see my part?" The question landed softly and hurt anyway. "Mrs. Reynolds recorded it," he said gently. "We'll watch it together." Mia nodded, trying to be brave in that quiet way that broke him more than tears ever could. Back home, Victoria was asleep on the couch, her breathing even. Ethan tucked Mia into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered another apology she pretended not to need. He set up the guest room just in case, then returned to the living room. When Victoria stirred, he gently woke her and guided her down the hall, stopping at the doorway. "I'll take the couch," he said before she could speak. She looked at him then, really looked at him, with something like disbelief mixed with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded and stepped back. He lay on the couch fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain fade into silence. Nothing inappropriate had happened. No line had been crossed. No one would ever know what it had cost him to make sure of that. As sleep finally pulled at him, one thought stayed heavy in his chest. This was what being a single dad meant. Doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. The applause had already thinned by the time Ethan found Mia. Parents crowded the hallway outside the auditorium, voices bright and overlapping, phones held up like trophies. Ethan moved through them slowly, his eyes searching until he saw her standing near the wall, her music folder pressed tight against her chest. She looked smaller than she had that morning, quieter. "Daddy," Mia said when she noticed him. She smiled, quick and automatic, like she wasn't sure what expression she was supposed to wear yet. Ethan knelt and opened his arms. She stepped into them, warm and familiar, and for a moment he held on a little too long. The smell of her shampoo, the soft weight of her against his chest. Proof that at least one part of his world was still solid. "You were amazing," he said, pulling back enough to look at her face. I heard the whole room go quiet. Mia nodded, pride flickering across her features, then fading just as fast. "Did you see my solo?" she asked. The words were gentle, no accusation, no anger, just curiosity. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He could have said yes. The lie would have been easy, maybe even merciful. But the truth had already cost him once that night, and he wasn't about to betray it now. "I didn't see it in person," he said quietly. "Mrs. Reynolds recorded it for us. We'll watch it together at home." Mia looked down at her shoes. One lace was undone. "Oh," she said, "that was it. That was it." One soft sound, and it hurt more than shouting ever could have. "I kept looking," she added after a moment, still not meeting his eyes. "I thought maybe you were just late." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She shrugged, the movement small and careful, like she was trying not to break something fragile. "It's okay. I know you're busy." Busy. The word sat heavy between them. On the drive home, Mia was quiet, not upset, just subdued. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror again and again, wishing he could rewind the night and choose differently, even though he knew, deep down, that he'd probably make the same choice all over again. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still on. The house looked the same as it always did. Ordinary, safe. Mia paused at the door. "Is someone here?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. A coworker wasn't feeling well. "She's resting for a bit." Mia accepted the answer easily, trusting him the way only kids could. She changed into pajamas, brushed her teeth, and climbed into bed without complaint. Ethan tucked her in, smoothing the blanket over her shoulders. "You really were incredible tonight," he said again. She smiled faintly. "Can we watch the video tomorrow?" "First thing," he promised. After she fell asleep, Ethan stood in the hallway longer than usual, listening to the quiet. Then he turned toward the living room. Victoria was still asleep on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. The borrowed blanket had slipped, and Ethan gently adjusted it, careful not to wake her. Seeing her there, his boss, vulnerable in his home, sent a ripple of unease through him, not because of what had happened, because of what it looked like. He moved through the kitchen, cleaning up small signs of life, the lunchbox on the counter, the mail stacked beside the fridge, Mia's drawings taped crookedly to the door. This was a home built on routine and trust, on appearances that mattered more than he'd ever admitted. He sat at the table and finally let the weight of the night settle in fully. What if a neighbor saw her car in the morning? What if someone from work connected the timing, the celebration, his early exit, her absence? In the office, perception carried more power than truth, and as a single father, Ethan already felt like he was being watched more closely than most. Like one wrong move could tip him from responsible to unreliable in a heartbeat. Custody wasn't something anyone talked about openly, but it hovered over him all the same. In every form, every emergency contact list, every quiet judgment from people who assumed a single dad was always one step from losing control. Near midnight, Victoria stirred. She sat up slowly, confusion flickering across her face before memory returned. Her eyes found Ethan at the table, hands wrapped around a mug he'd reheated twice without drinking. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, her voice rough. "I didn't mean to put you in this position." "You're okay," Ethan said. "You needed rest." She looked around again, mortification settling in as the reality of where she was caught up with her. "This isn't appropriate." "I know," he said. The word carried no judgment, just truth. "I should leave," she said. "It's late," Ethan replied. "You're not driving anywhere tonight. The guest room's ready if you want it." She hesitated, pride wrestling with exhaustion. Eventually, she nodded. Ethan showed her down the hall, stopping at the doorway. "I'll take the couch," he added before she could speak. Victoria studied him for a moment, something like surprise and guilt passing over her face. "I won't forget this," she said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. When the door closed, the house settled into silence again. Ethan lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the night on a loop. Mia's quiet disappointment, the risk he'd taken, the reality that no one would ever see the cost of doing the right thing. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows again, steady and patient. Ethan closed his eyes, knowing one thing with aching clarity. By morning, there would be consequences. He just didn't know yet whether the truth would protect him, or take everything he had left. Morning came quietly, like it didn't want to be noticed. A thin gray light slipped through the blinds and spread across the kitchen floor. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, damp with everything the night had carried with it. The coffee maker clicked on and began to hum, loud in the silence, filling the room with a bitter smell. Ethan usually loved and couldn't stand this morning. Ethan stood at the counter, both hands braced against the edge, staring into the sink without seeing it. His body felt hollow, like sleep had passed through him without stopping. Every sound made him tense, the tick of the clock, the faint creak of the house settling, the soft shuffle of movement behind him. Footsteps. He turned slowly. Victoria stood in the doorway. She was dressed again in her professional armor-pressed slacks, a crisp blouse, her hair pulled back tight. The borrowed clothes were gone, as if the night itself were already being erased. Only her eyes gave anything away. They moved quickly, taking in the room, the fridge covered in drawings, the lunchbox on the counter, the quiet proof of a life that had nothing to do with boardrooms or rumors. "Ethan," she said softly. He nodded once. There was a pause. Long enough for his pulse to pound in his ears. Long enough for everything he'd been holding back to press against his chest. Then she asked it. Did anything happen between us last night?" Her voice was controlled, but fear threaded through it. Not fear of him, fear of consequences, fear of a line she didn't remember crossing. Ethan swallowed. This was the moment everything balanced on. "No," he said. His voice was steady, even though something inside him cracked quietly. "Nothing happened. I helped you inside. That's all." Victoria exhaled sharply, like someone coming up for air after being underwater too long. Her shoulders sagged. Relief washed across her face, raw and unmistakable. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to be sure." Ethan nodded again. And just like that, something shifted. The relief stayed, but everything else disappeared. Her posture straightened. Her expression cooled. The distance returned, clean and immediate. "This was inappropriate," she continued, already stepping back into her role. "A lapse in judgment on my part. It won't happen again. It won't happen again. Not thank you for keeping me safe. Not. I'm sorry for what this cost you. Just a line drawn, sharp and final." "I expect discretion," she added. "Of course," Ethan replied. She glanced down the hallway. "Your daughter? She's getting ready for school." Victoria nodded. "I'll call a car." And then she was gone. The door closed with a soft click that echoed through the house far longer than it should have. Mia appeared moments later, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair still slightly damp from brushing. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Ethan answered, forcing a smile that felt too tight. She climbed into her chair and watched him pour cereal. "Did your friend feel better?" "Yes," he said. "She went home." Mia nodded, accepting it without question. She didn't mention the recital, didn't mention the solo. That silence sat heavier on Ethan than anything she could have said. At work, the atmosphere was different. Conversations dipped when Ethan walked by, eyes flicked toward him, then away. Someone from HR lingered near the copier longer than necessary. The walls felt closer. The air sharper. Victoria ran the morning meeting with perfect efficiency. Her voice was calm, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at Ethan once, not when he presented his numbers. Not when she approved his projections without comment. Not when the room nodded along to work he poured himself into. It was as if the night had never happened, except it had. Ethan felt it in the way his stomach stayed tight, in the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee, in the way he imagined every possible outcome spiraling just beyond his control. A call from HR, a quiet note in his file, a rumor that didn't need proof to do damage, and beyond all of it, custody. Questions. Concerns. The word alone made his chest ache. He pictured Mia sitting in a strange office, swinging her legs, waiting while adults decided whether her life stayed the same. The thought made him dizzy. At lunch, Ethan sat alone, scrolling through the video Mrs. Reynolds had sent, Mia on stage, standing tall, singing her solo with confidence that filled the room. He hadn't been there. The guilt hit him all over again, sharp and relentless. He had done everything right, every boundary respected, every choice made carefully, and still, he was the one left holding the weight. Invisible when things went well, disposable when they didn't. By the time the workday ended, Ethan felt wrung out. He sat at his desk for a long moment before standing, gathering his things slowly. No one stopped him. No one said anything. That silence felt like judgment all its own. As he walked out of the building, the fear finally settled in fully. Whatever came next, HR meetings, whispered conversations, unspoken assumptions, he knew one thing with painful clarity: he had nothing left to give. Nothing except the one thing he would always protect, no matter the cost: his daughter. And if the truth wasn't enough to save him, he didn't know what would be. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Ethan sat near the far end of the long glass table, his laptop closed, his hands folded tightly in front of him. He hadn't been scheduled to attend this meeting. The calendar invite had arrived late the night before, brief and vague. Mandatory attendance, no agenda, no explanation, which told him everything. Executives filled the room in quiet clusters, their voices low, their expressions careful. Someone glanced in Ethan's direction, then looked away too quickly. The air carried that familiar tension, the kind that showed up when decisions had already been made and someone was about to pay for them. The door opened. Victoria Hale walked in last. She looked exactly as she always did at work, composed, controlled, unreadable. Her posture was straight, her expression neutral, but Ethan noticed the tightness in her jaw, the way she paused for half a second before taking her seat at the head of the table. The meeting began with numbers, projections, quarterly adjustments. Ethan barely heard any of it. His pulse thudded in his ears as he waited for the moment he knew was coming. It arrived wrapped in polite language. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Before we move forward," he said carefully, "there's a matter of internal concern that needs to be addressed." The room shifted. "There have been questions," the man continued, "about professional boundaries, specifically involving senior leadership and a subordinate. No names, no details. Just enough." Ethan's chest tightened. This was how it happened. Quietly, cleanly, without ever giving him a chance to speak. He lowered his gaze to the table, thinking of Mia eating cereal that morning, swinging her legs, trusting him the way only children could. Then Victoria stood. The movement cut through the room like a blade. "Stop," she said. Not loud, not emotional. Absolute. Every conversation died instantly. "If this discussion is going to continue," Victoria said, her voice steady, "then it will continue with facts, not assumptions." The board member frowned. "Victoria, we're simply trying to—" "No," she interrupted, "you're speculating." She turned then, finally looking directly at Ethan. And something in her expression changed. "I'm going to be very clear," she said, addressing the entire room. Ethan Cole acted with complete professionalism at all times. A ripple of surprise moved around the table. "On the night in question," Victoria continued, "I was unwell. Mr. Cole ensured I was safe, protected my privacy, and respected every boundary without exception." Ethan felt his breath catch. There was no misconduct, she said firmly. No inappropriate behavior. What there was integrity. The room was silent now. He missed an important personal commitment that night, Victoria added, her voice tightening just slightly. Not because he was careless, but because he chose to prevent someone else from being harmed or humiliated. A murmur spread across the table, this time not suspicion, but discomfort. Victoria didn't stop. Ethan Cole is a single father, she said. He carries responsibilities most people in this room have never had to carry alone, and he does so quietly, consistently, without excuses. Ethan's hands trembled beneath the table. I will not allow rumors to damage the reputation of a man who demonstrated more character in one night than most people do in a year, Victoria said. And I won't sit silently while integrity is treated like a liability. She paused, letting the words land. If we're going to question anyone's judgment, she added, then we should question why someone doing the right thing was ever put under suspicion in the first place. No one spoke. Then one board member nodded slowly. Another cleared his throat and said, "Thank you for clarifying." The tension shifted, not gone, but redirected. Victoria sat back down. The meeting moved on. Decisions were made, votes were taken. But something fundamental had changed. The looks Ethan received now were different. Thoughtful, respectful, real. When the meeting ended, people stood and gathered their things. A few executives paused near Ethan's seat. Solid projections, one said quietly. Another offered a nod. Ethan packed his bag slowly, his chest finally easing. As the room emptied, Victoria approached him. "I should have spoken sooner," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Ethan met her gaze. "Thank you." She nodded once. "You didn't deserve any of this." Ethan walked out of the boardroom with his head high, past the glass walls that no longer felt quite so cold. The truth had finally been spoken. And this time it had been enough. The changes didn't arrive with applause or announcements. They came quietly, the way real stability usually did. 2 days after the board meeting, Ethan received an email asking him to stop by Human Resources. His stomach tightened on instinct, even though the tension that had hung over him all week had begun to ease. Fear didn't disappear just because the danger passed. It lingered, learned. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. They thanked him for his professionalism, for his discretion, for the consistency of his work over the years, projects completed on time, crises handled without drama, responsibility carried without complaint. Then they explained the adjustment. A new title. Expanded authority over operational planning. A raise that wasn't life-changing but mattered. And most importantly, a formal schedule agreement written into policy. Flexible hours, protected time, no more quiet favors or informal exceptions that could be questioned later. "This isn't sympathy," the HR director said plainly. "It's trust." That word stayed with Ethan all day. Trust meant someone had finally seen the whole picture, not just the employee, but the father. Not the rumor, but the record. That afternoon, he picked Mia up from school without rushing. No checking the clock, no silent panic about being late. She climbed into the car, backpack thumping against the door. "You're early," she said, surprised. Ethan smiled. "I'm going to be early more often." Her grin was instant and wide. "Does that mean you can come to practice now?" "Yes," he said. "All of it." That night, they sat together on the couch and watched the recital video. Mia sang her solo with steady confidence, her voice filling the room. Ethan didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't miss a single second. "You were incredible," he said when it ended. She leaned into his side. "I know." At work, things shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. Conversations didn't stop when Ethan walked by anymore. Colleagues asked his input. Executives acknowledged his role in meetings. The invisible line he'd been standing on for years finally faded. Victoria kept her distance at first. Professional, appropriate, respectful. Then one afternoon, she stopped by his desk. "How's Mia?" she asked. "She's good," Ethan replied. "Busy. Opinionated." Victoria smiled slightly. "That sounds about right. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to." Trust rebuilt itself slowly, through consistency, not confessions. A few weeks later, Victoria attended one of Mia's weekend rehearsals. She stood near the back, hands folded, unobtrusive. She clapped quietly when it ended. "You were wonderful," she told Mia afterward, kneeling to her level. "You have real presence." Mia studied her, then nodded seriously. "My dad listens when I practice." Victoria glanced at Ethan, something warm and unspoken passing between them. Life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were still early. Bills still arrived. Some nights, Ethan still fell asleep on the couch from sheer exhaustion, but the constant fear, the edge that had lived in his chest for years, finally loosened. He wasn't one mistake away from losing everything anymore. One night, as Ethan tucked Mia into bed, she asked, "Is Ms. Hale your friend?" He thought about it. "Yes," he said. "She is," Mia smiled sleepily. "I like her. She sees me." Later, Ethan stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. The house wasn't bigger. The future wasn't perfect, but it was solid. For the first time in a long while, when he whispered the promise he'd been making every night, "Tomorrow will be okay," it didn't feel like hope. It felt earned. The house was quiet in a way Ethan had learned to cherish, not the heavy quiet of loneliness, but the gentle kind that came from things being right where they belonged. Evening light spilled through the living room window, soft and gold, catching dust in the air. Mia sat on the rug with her music folder open, humming under her breath as she worked through a new piece, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee to keep time. Ethan sat on the couch, one arm resting along the back, a mug cooling in his hand. He didn't interrupt when she stumbled over a note. Didn't rush her when she paused. He just listened. Really listened. The way he'd learned mattered most. "Was that better?" Mia asked, looking up. Ethan smiled. "It was beautiful." A knock came at the door, easy, unhurried. Victoria stepped inside a moment later, dressed simply, no trace of the sharp edges she carried at work. She held a small bag in one hand. "I brought snacks," she said, tentative but hopeful. Mia's face lit up. "You can stay." Victoria laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat together on the floor, listening as Mia played again. Victoria didn't correct her, didn't offer advice. She just watched, eyes warm, fully present. Ethan felt something settle in his chest as he took it in. Not excitement, not relief. Peace. Later, after Mia was tucked into bed, Ethan stood in the doorway a moment longer than usual, watching her sleep. The steady rise and fall of her breathing grounded him the way it always had. In the kitchen, Victoria waited quietly. "She's amazing," she said. Ethan nodded. "She is." They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. What mattered was this moment, the calm, the safety, the sense that tomorrow didn't have to be feared. When Victoria left, the house didn't feel emptier. It felt full. Ethan turned off the lights, paused in the hallway, and whispered the promise he'd carried for years. "Tomorrow will be okay." And this time, he knew it was true. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.